And we are live. Welcome to the Cover One Roundup. I am your unusual primary host and only host for this evening, David Fox. Unfortunately, your usual current host, Kyle Slaggy, is not available for tonight. He is not feeling well. So we wish Kyle, of course, a speedy recovery. Um, we originally decided that we were going to do a training camp preview for this team tonight. Unfortunately, with Kyle being out, we kind of wanted to push that into a different day, so we'll push that into next week. Tonight, we are going to be talking about the Buffalo Bills coaching staff. It's had a surprising number of changes over the last couple months. And it's important to just sort of go through. And of course, we got offensive changes, defensive changes. There's a lot to go through, even special teams. So there's plenty of stuff to go through with this team. Yes, we are. I am, in fact, writing solo. And also, shout out to all of you lovely folks out there. John, always a strong listener. Vlad as well. Thank you. We always appreciate your support. And since it's just going to be me tonight, if any of y'all have any questions, any comments, concerns, derogatory remarks, feel free to throw them into the chat. I will be glad to answer questions and just sort of read your comments, just sort of your thoughts, because it's just going to be me, and when it's just me, I can ramble for quite a bit. So, without further ado, let's get into this. So. Let's first get into the roundup because that's what this podcast is usually about. Rounding up the news. Nothing happened, so we're just going to move on. Let's start with this coaching staff. And let's start at the top with the man, the myth, the process himself, Mr. Sean McDermott. Sean McDermott came to this team in 2017. He spent a long time on Andy Reid's Philadelphia staff. He ended up getting fired in 2010 due to what many perceived to be an underperforming red zone defense. I don't think that was necessarily the whole story, but neither Andy Reid or Sean McDermott really elaborate further than that. So there's that. He ended up going to Ron Rivera's staff in Carolina, where he was the defensive coordinator from 2011 through 2016. They made a great Super Bowl run in 2015. And in 2017, he was hired to be the head coach of the Buffalo Bills. Obviously, Sean McDermott's done an amazing job. He's brought a totally different attitude and culture to Buffalo. He's really had a big hand in how this whole team has been formed. He's handpicked his own GM in Brandon Beane. This is Sean McDermott's team, and he's definitely evolved over the years. He has gone from somebody who seemed to be more traditional, more conservative in his approach to things, and definitely in his defensive style, which is definitely rooted in that old drop zone coverage, and which is definitely more of that Jim Johnson where he learned from that in Philadelphia. And it seems that over the years he's changed. The defense is still generally the same because it's been so great for much of his time in Buffalo. Why mess with it too much if it's working really, really well? But his approach, I think his philosophy, there's been some changes. I mean, we've seen him be more aggressive on fourth down. We've seen him not just in giving up punts, but also in hey, we're in position to go score. Let's just go ahead and score a touchdown rather than try and get a field goal. I think that's really admirable, and something that I think a lot of people had concerns of when this hire was made was, this was a time when offensive coaches were the ones you wanted to go after. This was the same coaching cycle as Sean McVay. And nobody really knew what Sean McVay was going to turn into. But there was still just a lot of, we want an offensive coach. It's an offensive league. Hiring a defensive coach didn't seem like the trendy move. But what's interesting about McDermott is he's fully embraced a very pass-first modern offense. When he first came on, he brought in Rick Dennison, who was a sort of a Shanahan tree guy, a West Coast offense type of guy, which didn't really work for Tyrod Taylor, who they had at the time. It definitely wasn't going to work with Josh Allen, that's for sure. So after an underperforming offense in 2017, despite still making the playoffs in that year, they moved on from Rick Dennison. And they hired Brian Daboll, which was, again, a very sort of unusual hire. Nobody really was certain who Brian Daboll was. He wasn't like a popular candidate. He wasn't some trendy name. He was just somebody that knew the spread offense, and that has shown in the last few years as he was the coordinator here. And it's why he's gotten a head coaching job with the Giants. Ronald Ringler. Sean is from Lansdale, Pennsylvania, as was my dad. Shout out, Lansdale, Pennsylvania, home of the infamous Sean McDermott and the infamous Ringler father. So good for them. With McDermott, it's been really interesting to see his evolution. I mean, he's somebody that really preaches culture, and like a lot of coaches really talk about culture. There's only a few that really seem to mean it, and McDermott really does seem to mean it. I mean, I remember in that first season when he had the players during training camp come up, and every once in a while, one of them would share like a very personal story for them. And that was just really interesting to me. It was something that clearly affected a lot of the players. Jordan Mills was somebody that was highlighted in an article when McDermott started doing that. I think just being very open and very vulnerable with your people, with your teammates is important to just building that camaraderie and friendship. I think that's a really cool thing to be able to do. And McDermott's really just put together a really great staff over the years. And it's been interesting because the first few years he had a lot of veteran coaches that I think he knew from, his time in Carolina, his time in Philadelphia, where he brought in guys like Juan Castillo, David Culley. He kept Danny Crossman as the special teams coordinator. It was about what you expected. But after a few years, you could see he kind of felt a little bit more comfortable as a head coach, and more comfortable with being able to sort of dictate the different parts of this team to what he wanted, while still letting his coaches coach. So he just sort of said, like, well, I'm just going to hire some, maybe lesser experienced guys. And he did. He definitely did do that. I mean, that's sort of where you get guys like Chad Hall in particular, and we'll get to him. But it's very interesting to see the evolution of McDermott, and he's been a phenomenal head coach. I understand that that last game against the Chiefs really leaves a lot of people with a bad taste in their mouth, and that's understandable. It still does for me. But you know what? Like, this dude has taken a moribund, like, just stuck in the mud franchise and brought it into the era where we are now, where the Bills are the betting favorites, like 2-1 to be the Super Bowl champions in 2022. I mean, that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. And I don't think really anybody expected that when they hired McDermott. So I'm always glad to have Sean McDermott as the head coach of this team. And I will fight anybody who decides to slander that beautiful bald man. Moving on, we're going to get into the offense, because this is a wonderful evolution that this team has taken on. And we've actually had an article written about the offensive coordinator, Ken Dorsey, by one of our newest contributors at Low Buffalo. So if y'all want to go ahead and check that out over at Cover One, he wrote a great piece about Ken Dorsey and what we can sort of expect, or what maybe we should or shouldn't expect from Ken Dorsey in year one. And it's very interesting. And we're going to talk about Ken Dorsey right now. So Ken Dorsey was promoted after Brian Daboll was given the head coaching job with the New York Giants. Shout out to Kyle for showing up in the podcast. Even if you're not here to talk. We love you, Kyle. We look forward to having you next week. I say we. I'm the only one here. I guess I mean we, as including us fans and those of us in the chat. So Ken Dorsey, longtime quarterbacks coach for the Carolina Panthers when McDermott was there in Carolina, when Cam Newton was quarterback. There's been a lot of when Josh Allen was coming into the NFL, and when he had his first year or two, there were a lot of comparisons to Josh Allen with Cam Newton, or to Cam Newton with Josh Allen, rather. And it was understandable because they're very similarly built. You know, they're both very big, very thickly built quarterbacks that have super strong arms and were pretty raw coming out of college. Cam Newton found more early success in the NFL than Josh Allen did, because Josh Allen was like as raw can be. Cam Newton was not a refined product, but certainly somebody that was more put together than Josh Allen was. And, you know, having Steve Smith also helps things, rather than, you know, Andre Holmes and Kelvin Benjamin as your wide receivers. So Ken Dorsey has worked with a quarterback like Josh Allen before. He knows how to work with him. He's been working with him. He was the passing game coordinator last year. And I think that the move for him to be the current offensive coordinator was very natural. It's what a lot of us expected if and when Brian Daboll actually got a head coaching job. So I am excited to see what he's going to do. It is worth saying that, like, I mean, this is his first year. And while he has been given a wonderful group to work with in Josh Allen, of course, Stephon Diggs, Gabriel Davis, Isaiah McKenzie, drafted Khalil Shakir in the 5th round. I mean, there's plenty of stuff from Devin Singletary, OJ Howard, Dawson Knox. I mean, there's so much that Ken Dorsey can work with. I do think it's reasonable to say, like, it might take a little bit for him to get his footing and get into a rhythm as an offensive coordinator. It's a difficult thing to be able to just have full control over everything, have to make adjustments when you need to make adjustments, knowing when to make adjustments. You know, it could be like maybe even in the first couple of games where, you know, everything's working, everything's fine, everything's going well. First game's going to be against the Rams, so I don't expect that to be the case. But, you know, it's certainly possible where things do get into a rhythm with him, and then he hits a wall, or he hits a good defense or something, and he might struggle to adjust to something. And that's just sort of something that you have to go through as a coach, and something that he's going to have to figure out. I think that this staff, and in particular McDermott, has also surrounded him with other coaches that have a lot of experience either on this staff or just sort of in general from their previous stints in the NFL. And we're about to jump into that. But yeah, just Ken Dorsey, I'm very excited to see what exactly he's going to bring that's going to be different. I'm sure, generally speaking, the core of this offense is probably going to look pretty similar, but Kyle and I have talked about this before. I think we're going to expect to see more 12 personnel with this offense moving forward. I think we might see a little bit more under center stuff. It's going to be very, very interesting. Yes, unfortunately, Kyle is in fact the ill boy today. He is sick, cannot speak for an hour straight like we normally do. Also, I don't know if anybody else hears the thunder and the lightning on the outside of my home right now. But if I suddenly cut out due to a lack of internet, it's Mother Nature's fault. And clearly they are enemies of the pod, not like you lovely folks who are allies of the pod. Ken Dorsey was a legendary quarterback during the prime U years of the Hurricanes. Wasn't Dorsey undefeated through his high school and college playing career? That's actually a very good question. I know Ken Dorsey was he was a legend when he was at Miami. I don't think he was undefeated in college. I could be wrong. We're having our producers check that right now. Unfortunately, Wikipedia is not great for that, so we're going to take a look at Pro Football Reference. I mean, Ken Dorsey really was a really great quarterback when he was at Miami. He was genuinely phenomenal. Let's see, college. Come on, there we go. Passing, completions, rates, win loss. Do we have anything about win loss? Anything at all? Great, that's awesome. So that was a wonderful waste of time. Ken Dorsey was great. We'll just leave it at that. Great guy. David, who will get a head coach job first, Dorsey or Joe Brady? That's a great question. And perhaps a bit ironic because Joe Brady is the next coach we're going to be talking about. Joe Brady was the sort of wonder child who helped birth Joe Burrow when he was at LSU. Joe Brady was hired from the New Orleans Saints coaching staff to the LSU coaching staff to be their passing game coordinator. He brought in a much more spread, pass-heavy attack that took advantage of Joe Burrow, of course, but also guys like Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, both of whom don't know if you've heard of them. They're pretty good players in the NFL. It helps to have 2 first-round type receivers on your offense when you're a passing game coordinator. And from there, he managed to leverage that into a offensive coordinator position with the Carolina Panthers when Matt Rule took over for that team. And that team has had some success, but it's also been extraordinarily inconsistent under Joe Brady's direction when he was the offensive coordinator there. Though a lot of that I don't think could be all on Joe Brady. We have an update on the Ken Dorsey stats: 38-2 in college. Pretty good freaking record. God, it's crazy. That's crazy. 38-2 in college. I mean, it helps when you have the team that he had when he was there. But with Brady in Carolina, I mean, they signed Teddy Bridgewater in their first season with Carolina there. And he just, he is who he is at this point. He is not somebody that is going to elevate your team to a particularly high level, but he's also not going to completely destroy your offense either. What did end up destroying those offenses in Carolina really was just a total lack of offensive line help. They went from bad in 2020 to worse in 2021. I mean, this team had like Cam Irving playing at left tackle when Cam Irving couldn't play left tackle in college. Like he was brutal in college. Pretty like QB in Carolina. Yeah, he really did. He really did. Joe Brady was a scapegoat for the coward Matt Rule. That is correct, Kyle. I mean, not for nothing. I mean, I feel like we've hinted at this before or talked about it before, maybe more in season. But like that, Matt Rule is awful. Like he is a bad head coach in Carolina, and he's a mess. And honestly, if Urban Meyer was not a bigger mess in Jacksonville, Matt Rule would have gotten way more national attention for what he had been putting together in Carolina. And, sacrificing Joe Brady to keep his own job. I mean, I get it. I probably would too, to an extent. But, this is not to absolve Joe Brady of any of his faults. There were a lot of issues with red zone offense for that team, and even just like coordinating and planning red zone offense, that was an issue. I do think that jumping from quality control assistant to passing game coordinator in college to offensive coordinator in the NFL is like meteoric rise, and like people were expecting this dude to be like a head coach probably by now, honestly. Clearly that's not what happened. I do think that him being the quarterback's coach and just the quarterback's coach is a really great thing for this team. Having another spread guy in this room, in this offense, having that say in the offense, I think it's going to be really great for this team. I think it's going to be good for Joe Brady to just like take a step back, focus, reset himself. And, presuming that this offense finds the type of success it has in the last few years, Joe Brady may be looking at another offensive coordinator job sometime soon. moving on, we're going to get to everyone's favorite hire of this offseason for the coaching staff, Erin Cromer. Definitely the most talked about hire, other than maybe Ken Dorsey. Erin Cromer is a former Bills coach, was here, brought on when I believe it was the Doug Marrone era, or maybe I can't remember if it was the Doug Marrone era or the Rex Ryan era, I believe. Yeah, so he was the offensive coordinator for the Bears in 2013, 2014. Then when Rex Ryan was hired, he was the offensive line coach. So it was during the Rex Ryan era. And he put together some really good offensive lines. He got a lot out of some like not great offensive linemen when he was here in Buffalo. So I am very, very, very excited to have Erin Cromer as part of this team, because I think that his abilities to coach the offensive line are what is going to help unlock guys like Devin Singletary and James Cook to an extent. And maybe Zach Moss, who knows? I'm like I'm like 99% of the way out on Zach Moss at this point, but there's like that 1% of me that's like, maybe. And Erin Cromer is a big part of that. I'm super excited for Erin Cromer to be here, because they basically already have his type of dude on this types of guys on this offensive line. Deion Dawkins is like definitely one of his types. Mitch Morse, to an extent, is one of his types. He's definitely athletic. Doesn't quite have the same size that I think he would love, but I do think he has that athleticism that he wants to bring. Spencer Brown, I am so excited to see what he's going to do with Spencer Brown. Eric has already put out a video talking about this. It's a great video. Y'all need to check it out. It's really great. It makes me very, very excited to see what Spencer Brown can do. Because Spencer Brown was put in a really difficult position, having to be the starting right tackle. And he flashed his moments, especially in run blocking. But he definitely struggled as a pass protector. He struggled just to be consistent game to game, drive to drive. So I am excited to see what he's going to do with someone as big and talented and raw as Spencer Brown. They brought in Roger Saffold, who's another Cromer type of guy. I just think that this run game is going to really take a step forward just from having Cromer here and having his knowledge. I know when they hired Cromer, Eric, Anthony, Prohaska, and Kendall did a great video sort of going through his philosophy and they showed some clips from his coaching clinics. And what I got from that was just that he knows how to keep it simple and translatable. Now, when I say keep it simple, I don't mean it in the sense of like keep it simple, stupid, because that's sort of like a bad way of coaching, in my opinion. From what I've heard from some of my friends that are coaches, is you don't need to keep it simple. You need to keep it likable and learnable. And I think that's what Erin Cromer does. I think that what he says just clicks and makes sense, and and that's what you want. You want your guys to be able to absorb that information and be able to visualize it and take it out onto the field with them. When you say, step and move your hands with you, you want them to be able to understand what that means and just take it and make sense out of it right then and there. And I think that that's going to be good. And there's something that I think Eric has brought up a couple of times before with Cromer is, he talks about how, look, he'll tell guys he's gonna switch some guys around. He's gonna try some guys at different positions, and he's basically gonna tell them like, look, you're gonna suck at this for a while. But that's okay. You got to be able to just suck and learn about it. And if it works, you're gonna get it. And if it's not, then we're gonna figure something out. And I think that's really good. Douglas Masters bringing up a great point. Please let Mitch Morse keep pulling from center. He is so good at that. Mitch Morse is fantastic as a puller in run blocking. Getting those pin pull schemes with Mitch Morse is so important. I think he is absolutely phenomenal at that. We are going to be getting rid of the bots here who are trying to entrap you. So there we go. All right. Does Erin Cromer have that dog in him? Who's to say? That's great. Data's here. God. Jason Taylor, if the run game gets going, no more light boxes. Allen gonna line him up. That is the hope, right? I mean, that was something that the Bills really couldn't take advantage of. The defenses kept playing too high coverages against Allen and Mahomes, and they didn't really have an answer to that because they didn't have a great run game. Now for the Chiefs, it was more a lack of talent at their running back position and a lack of willingness to run the ball on the part of Andy Reid. They eventually sort of found the right balance and the right answers. For the Bills, it really was just not have. I mean, whatever it was just not working. They were not taking advantage of light boxes. They were not running the ball effectively. It was just kind of a mess until Devin Singletary and Ryan Bates sort of began to click together for this offense. And Singletary had a great end to the season. Ryan Bates really helped solidify things up front. So I am very, very, very excited to see what Erin Cromer is going to bring to this offensive line. Moving on, we've got Chad Hall, who joined this team as a coaching assistant on offense. And eventually became the wide receivers coach in 2019. This is somebody that from what players have said, like his players have a ton of respect for him. And like, he is not a particularly older player. I think, I could be wrong, but I think Stephon Diggs might actually be close to his age. But Chad Hall just brings like a ton of energy, and people seem to really, really gravitate towards him. He's just a really fun coach to have on this team. He's done a phenomenal job. There was a good video that the Bills put out not too long ago, with quote best coach on the staff, and I don't think that I don't think somebody on this team says that very lightly. I don't think things like that get thrown around for no reason. Yes, Chad was in fact a Eagles wide receiver. He was in the Air Force Academy, I believe. He was a great player for them in college. Ended up going to the Eagles. Played well in the preseason. Ended up starting like their Week 17 game in 2010, I think. Scored a touchdown. Yeah, it was great. He was a fun player to root for, and is a fun coach to root for. He's been great here. He's been really great. It would not surprise me, as Kyle says, future OC Chad Hall. That would not surprise me, whether it's with the Bills or with another team. Chad Hall has a definite future in the NFL. That is for sure. Moving on to tight ends coach Rob Boris. Rob Boris is a very interesting coach to me, because he's one of the few coaches on this entire staff that has been here since McDermott has been hired in 2017. Previously to that, Rob Boris was the tight ends coach for the Rams. And in 2016, he was their offensive coordinator, which when current Bills backup quarterback Case Keenum was starting for the Rams, and Jared Goff was a rookie. That offense, unfortunately, was a total disaster. They didn't really have any good receivers. They didn't really have a great offensive line. Their quarterbacks both stunk. To be perfectly honest, like Jared Goff as a rookie was awful. Case Keenum, God bless him, tried his best, but he is not a 17, 16 game starter at quarterback. So hiring him, I mean, he was not somebody that was connected to a previous McDermott staff on Carolina or in Philly. So it was sort of an odd hire to have, but he was a veteran coach that he wanted to hire. It's more interesting that he was kept after those first couple of years, because McDermott, fired quite a few coaches like Rick Dennison and David Culley and Juan Castillo, but ended up keeping Rob Boris, even though there wasn't a ton of production from the tight end room for most of those few years. And yet they ended up trusting him to develop Dawson Knox, who, as we saw this past year, really did develop, not only just as a receiver and unlocking that potential as a receiver, but he's also really improved as a blocker. Rob Boris he might be where Chad Hall is going to get the claim now to be the best coach on this Bills team. I think Rob Boris might be the most underrated coach on this Bills team. He has taken Dawson Knox, who was a true just ball of clay of raw, untapped talent, and really molded him into a genuinely good tight end who is going to end up getting paid by someone. I mean, it could be the Bills. Hopefully it's the Bills. I love Dawson Knox. I know the rest of y'all love Dawson Knox. So I hope that he manages to stick around. But I mean, it's impressive what Rob Boris has done with this tight end room. And, even with someone like Tommy Sweeney, who, obviously is not a true NFL quality tight end. That was obvious given that the Bills didn't even activate him for most of last year, even though they only carried one tight end coming into most of the end of the season. He still managed to get something out of him. And part of that is just that Tommy Sweeney also had issues, some medical issues in between the time he was drafted and last season, but regardless of that. And then the Bills signed OJ Howard. Hope he gets OJ Howard to come around, as Ronald says here. OJ Howard is another guy that has a ton of potential. Didn't produce a lot in college, but just oozed potential all over the place. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. I think a second tight end on this team, I don't really know what that role is going to be, even with the thought of getting more 12 personnel packages in this offense, presumably. I wonder how big of an impact OJ Howard is going to have. OJ Howard is still an upgrade, obviously, and you would rather have OJ Howard as your tight end too, rather than Tommy Sweeney or someone else. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they end up doing with OJ Howard and how much he'll actually contribute. So I'm very interested in that, and I am, as always, a big Rob Boris fan. Rob Boris, if you're listening, we'd love to interview you here on the Cover One Roundup. Promise, we'll treat you well, or at least as well as we can. Moving on, we're gonna get to Kelly Skipper, the running backs coach. Another 2017 hire. Another guy that has just stuck around. It's interesting because he's been a long time running back coach. Started coaching running backs at Fresno State, went to UCLA, was their offensive coordinator for a few years, went to Washington State and was their running back special teams coach for a few years. And then joined the Raiders coaching staff in 2007, which, if I recall correctly, was when Lane Kiffin was their head coach, which is interesting. And he was there through 2014, ended up going to the Jags in 2015 through 2016. And then 2017 on throughout has been with the Bills. And he's been the running backs coach in the NFL from 2007 to now. He's gotten, quite a bit. I mean, he coached up Darren McFadden to his pretty much only legitimately good season. In 2015, he took a rookie, TJ Yeldon, who became the first Jags rookie to go over 1,000 scrimmage yards, for whatever that's worth. I mean, that is something. Of course, TJ Yeldon ended up coming on to the Bills. Kelly Skipper is interesting. He's not somebody that's brought up a lot. And I don't think that he's done like a, outstanding, flawless job, but I think that he deserves credit for sticking with Devin Singletary and really getting him to where I think that team needed him to be at the end of 2021. I mean, Singletary is a very unique runner. He's not an overly talented runner. He's not super athletic. He's smaller, but he just has a very unique running style. And I think that Skipper has done probably the best he can to just get him to work and to figure out how to best use his abilities, especially in between the tackles. So I don't necessarily have a ton to say about Kelly Skipper. He's not really somebody that's brought up a lot. He's not somebody that, was given necessarily some, raw talent like a Josh Allen or a Dawson Knox and molded them into some Pro Bowl or high level player. But, it is interesting that they've kept him around and that they seem confident in him moving forward. So that is a plus in my book. We're going to kind of quickly just do an overview of the assistants on offense, starting with Austin Gund, who was hired in 2022. He previously was the University of Delaware recruiting quality control personnel person. Then he went to Wake Forest and was their graduate assistant for 3 years, primarily worked with the offensive line there. Quality control in the NFL, really, you're just kind of you're making sure that everything is lining up the way that it should be. You're making sure that practices run the way that they should be run. You're helping your coaches on offense just make sure that everything is running as smoothly as they can and that the coaches can actually coach, the position coaches can actually coach. It would not surprise me if somebody with a peeking eye, let's call it, and wants to keep an eye out on Austin Gund, it would not surprise me if he spends a lot of time with Erin Cromer and the offensive line, given that he primarily worked with a lot of the offensive line when he was GA at Wake Forest. Kelly Skipper is a boss name for a running back coach. That is a good point. Honestly, that is a very, very, very good point. I think the run game success will rely more on Cromer than Skipper. Yeah, I agree with that, Jason Taylor. And that's sort of why we went more into Erin Cromer and what he'll bring to this offensive line. I do think that it's probably more important for Erin Cromer to be successful than it is for Kelly Skipper to be this incredible, gifted running backs coach. Moving on from Austin Gund to Mark Lupic, who is the assistant quarterbacks and game management coach. Mark Lupic is very interesting, actually. He is another 2017 original hire. He's held quite a few hats for this team since he came on. When he was hired in 2017, he was the assistant quarterbacks coach and the offensive quality control. Then he was promoted in 2018 through 2019 to offensive assistant and defensive special projects, which is interesting. And then in 2021, he was the assistant wide receiver and game management coach, and in 2020 as well. And now in 2022, he's back to the assistant quarterbacks coach and game management coach. I think that this is somebody that they really, really trust. I mean, that's pretty clear. It's somebody that this guy seems to have quite a bit of knowledge, that they feel confident in him being a coach to multiple positions, even if it is just assistant coaching. I think that says something about him. And it's interesting that they have given him control over game management, or at least to be the guy with that title. In reality, Sean McDermott is the one who controls how the game flows and the decisions that are being made. But somebody like Lupic is the one on the microphone, presumably, who is saying, like, hey, get ready to take a timeout, get ready to go for it. This is probably a 4th down situation. This is, not a punting situation, that sort of thing. And I think it's interesting that McDermott trusts somebody like Lupic with that kind of responsibility to do that while also being an assistant offensive coach. So I think that's pretty impressive. And it's good to have somebody like that who's been on this team for a while now. And that's what you want. You want a lot of continuity with your coaching staff, assuming they're good. And this coaching staff is very good. Let's see. So moving on, we have Ryan Wendell, who has been a Bills assistant since 2019. He was working just as a general offensive assistant. Then he started working with the O-line as the assistant offensive line coach in 2020. He's somebody that actually played with the Patriots for a lot of his career. When Josh McDaniels got the head coaching job with the Raiders this past offseason, there were rumors that Wendell was going to be heading over to the Raiders with him. Ended up not materializing. He'll be staying in Buffalo. Not a lot to say about him other than if you look at his picture. Yes, exactly, Kyle. This is the dude with the beard. If you go to this dude on the Bills website and you look at this picture, I mean, this is exactly what you would expect an assistant offensive line coach in the NFL to look like. Long hair, scraggly beard, intimidating as all hell. This is exactly what you think of. I think it is interesting that he chose to stay in Buffalo, even though uh, Johnson, whatever. Oh my God, what was the previous offensive line coach's name? I've already forgotten. He no longer matters to me. He went to the Giants with Brian Daboll, and Josh McDaniels, someone who, I mean, seemed to be interested in bringing him along, and he basically said no, and it's interesting. I think it's interesting, and I think it kind of speaks to where not only just like the culture of the Bills, but also just where the Bills are as a team. Brian Wendell can win a Super Bowl here with the Bills. And the Raiders, even though they have quite a bit to be excited about, I don't know if they're necessarily winning the Super Bowl, much less making the playoffs. It's a lot. So easy a caveman can do it. There you go. Bring back those Geico commercials, right? Last assistant on offense is Mike Shula, who is actually kind of interesting. He was the former Panthers offensive coordinator when Ken Dorsey was the quarterbacks coach there. Bobby Johnson, that's who it was. Thank you. I knew it was something Johnson. I just could not remember that first name. Thank you. Douglas Masters really coming in clutch right now. Mike Shula, he is going to be working as the senior offensive assistant. I think this is a sort of underrated hire for this team. Not only does he bring a lot of experience as an OC, but also just like this is somebody that Ken Dorsey has worked with and presumably trusts enough to have on this team. And I think that just having him and guys like let's actually talk about this. Let's talk about this in relation to Mike Shula. Mike Shula was a long time offensive coordinator. He was the offensive coordinator for the Panthers 2013 through 2017. He was with the Giants as their offensive coordinator from 2018 2019. Erin Cromer used to be the offensive coordinator in Chicago for 2 years before he came to Buffalo as the O-line coach with Rex Ryan. Now he's back in Buffalo. Rob Boris, unsuccessful, but still an offensive coordinator for a year. Joe Brady, unsuccessful, but still an offensive coordinator for 2 years. There's a lot of former offensive coordinators that are on this team that are going to be there to help Ken Dorsey move this team along and maybe help ease that learning curve for him. I think Mike Shula in particular is going to be really important for that because Mike Shula definitely had his faults as an offensive coordinator when he was with the Panthers and the Giants. But there were times where that offense, like when that offense was working, it was working. I mean, that 2015 offense, everything was working with them. And part of that was just, really good offensive line play for them. Some of that was just the MVP level at which Cam Newton was playing. But some of that, I mean, really was just Mike Shula getting into a groove and really managing to work things the way that they need to do. There's a lot that I think Mike Shula can bring to this team. That I'm glad that they hired someone with that kind of experience and that kind of relationship with Ken Dorsey to have on this team. So I'm excited about that. That is going to do it for the offense. My voice is now starting to go. I blame Kyle for this. Now I'm going to end up with a bad voice at the end of this. Oh, God. We have another question here. Douglas Master says, you think Shula has a role helping put together the weekly game plan, kind of a specialized administrative-like role almost? It's always hard to say what the specific role of somebody like a senior offensive assistant actually has. It could be something as simple as just like, hey, do this menial task every week so that I don't have to do it. It could be something like, I don't know, like something like that can really just go from one end of the spectrum to the other. My personal guess, I have no evidence for this. I don't know enough about this staff. I am not the one with the inside information. My personal guess is he's just going to be kind of somebody that is in Dorsey's hip pocket, just sort of saying like, hey, listen, think about this. Think about this when we were in Carolina together. Think about this when we had Cam. This is sort of something you can do with Josh. This is something you can do with Dawson now that, that we used to do with Greg Olsen. Like there's a lot of things that I think they can sort of connect together and really help with. And just to have somebody who's that veteran presence who has been there before, done that before, and honestly can just say like, hey, yeah, I thought that same thing that you did that you're trying to do right now. It's not going to work. I tried it before. It doesn't work. So I think that that's something that can be really, really helpful. It's sort of, it reminds me of like when teams hire a lot, like when front offices hire former GMs to their teams, you'll often see people from the former team, like let's say when Ryan Grigson was hired to the Browns front office, there were a lot of people obviously were like, oh my God, why would you hire Ryan Grigson? Why would you do this? Why would blah, 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 blah. Same thing sort of happened when Ryan Pace was hired by the Falcons this offseason to be in their front office. And it's like, look, you want guys that have that experience, and you want guys who can say like, hey, yeah, I was in that seat not too long ago, thinking the same thing you did. Guess what? It doesn't work out. It's important to just have guys who can be those sort of personal guardrails for you, and just say like, hey, I know your thought process. I understand your thought process because I was right there with you. It's just not going to work. I'm here to protect you, I think that that's sort of the same sort of thing that that Mike Shula is going to bring to this team. Now we're officially moving on to defense. We're going to start at the top, as we do, with Leslie Frazier, who is the defensive coordinator and assistant head coach. Leslie Frazier was promoted to the assistant head coach a year or two ago. He's been super consistent, super great, just really a great guy to have on this team. Leslie Frazier is somebody that I think takes a little too much flack at times. Probably took a little too much flack for that 13 seconds debacle. I don't think that that's like a solely Leslie Frazier thing. I think that you could kind of spread that around to a number of people on this coaching staff. I do think Leslie Frazier brings a lot. Him and McDermott work together when they were both in Philly. They both come from that Jim Johnson coaching tree. They both just really mesh well together defensively. He's somebody that has had head coaching interviews recently. I'm a little surprised he wasn't hired for this cycle, but I'm sure maybe next year or maybe even the year after that. It depends. Who knows? Leslie Frazier is somebody that is a wonderful person to have on this team. And in fact, when Jordan Phillips was brought back this past offseason in free agency, he mentioned his relationship with Leslie Frazier as a big part of that. Because Jordan Phillips has had his issues with other coaching staffs in the NFL. One of them was with Adam Gase, and honestly, who can blame him for that? But he obviously didn't do what was expected of him in Arizona when he left here to go to Arizona in free agency. And he talked about in his press conference coming back to Buffalo a couple months ago. He talked about a time when Leslie Frazier was basically called him out and essentially just said, he took him aside and said, like, look, like I'm calling you out because I know you can do more. Like I want to get you to that point. And so Leslie Frazier really spent a lot of time with Jordan Phillips, and that was something that he hadn't really experienced before. I think again that sort of speaks to the culture that they have built in Buffalo, that they have a coach like this who is the defensive coordinator and is somebody that has a lot of responsibilities as the defensive coordinator and as the assistant head coach, but is willing to take a lot of time to just like have a relationship with his players. I think that that's really, really going to be good for this team. Jason Taylor writes, Frazier getting up there in age going to be harder and harder to get a head coaching gig. Unfortunately, that is very true. Leslie Frazier has had a number of interviews. It seemed like he was all set to be the Bears head coach, and then they pivoted to Matt Eberflus from the Indianapolis Colts. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be tough for him to get a head coaching gig. He's currently 63, which is the same age as Vic Fangio, weirdly enough, because Vic Fangio looks a lot older, not going to lie. But Vic Fangio only got his first head coaching job a couple years ago and unfortunately did not succeed when he was in Denver. However, Leslie Frazier probably also might have an advantage just from being a former head coach with Minnesota and having success there. But we'll see. We'll see what comes of Leslie Frazier. I am just glad that he is back with Buffalo. The defensive staff has had a lot of overturn over the past couple months. there's been a lot of moving and shifting around, and we're going to get into that. The first thing that really hasn't changed has been John Butler as the defensive backs coach. John Butler is somebody that the defensive backs, in particular, Trey White, has really sung John Butler's praises. He is also the defensive passing game coordinator. John Butler seems to be somebody that a lot of players like. Trey White has spoken very highly of him. And if Trey White speaks highly of his position coach, then I'm going to believe that, because Trey White has just been phenomenal for this team. He really talks about very specific coaching points. I think there's it's a video that NFL Films did with Brian Baldinger when they did those sort of like intensive focuses on like particular positions. I think those are on YouTube. I know they're on like NFL Game Pass if you have that. You can have access to those, but I would try to look up what Trey White talks about with him. It's really, really interesting, and I'm glad that John Butler is still here. Eric Washington is going to be the defensive line coach again. He's going to be the senior defensive assistant as well. There was hope that Eric Washington was going to really take this defensive line to another step forward. There were mixed results with that last year. Ed Oliver, we talked about Ed Oliver a lot on this podcast. I think he's really taken a big step forward, even if the national media doesn't necessarily acknowledge that as much as we do here. Ed Oliver really did take a big step forward. Greg Rousseau, he was the far and away, and we've talked about this as well before, the highest graded run defender for his position in the NFL per PFF, which is insane for a rookie who was deemed to be a very raw player, especially as a pass rusher, but like to be as technically sound as he was, it's just crazy. Greg Rousseau really was phenomenal as a rookie run defender. It would be lying, honestly, or at least disingenuous to say that Eric Washington had nothing to do with that. So I am looking forward to seeing what he's going to be able to bring. And I'm looking forward to see where guys like Greg Rousseau and Boogie Basham and AJ Epinesa are going to take their steps forward, if they take a step forward. AJ Epinesa, I know, has been a big disappointment and is probably somebody that people probably are going to point to say, like, hey, maybe Eric Washington isn't the guy. Maybe not. I don't know. There were, like, AJ Epinesa was not a perfect product coming out of Iowa either. So maybe this is just something that they have to deal with. But we shall see. Moving on to Bobby Babich, not to be confused with his father, Bob Babich. Bobby Babich has been coaching the safeties since 2017. When his dad, Bob, retired this offseason, they decided to move Bobby Babich to the linebackers coach position. I am glad that they feel confident in Bobby Babich to be this guy. He has obviously done a phenomenal job with Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, coaching them up as the safeties. He has just done an absolutely spectacular job there. And I am excited to see what he might bring to the linebacker position for guys like, obviously, Tremaine Edmonds, but also Matt Milano. Milano being a former safety in college, there's definitely stuff that I think Bobby Babich can bring that'll make sense for them. It'll be very interesting, and this seemed like a very natural shift for them. So then they definitely trust him enough to do that. So I'm excited to see that. Moving on to Jim Salgado, who is going to be taking over as the safety coach from Bobby Babich. Salgado has also been on this team since 2017. Originally was just a defensive assistant through 2019. In 2020, he became the nickel corner coach, which was a position that pretty much no other team had. But because the Bills spend so much time in nickel defense, it was, pretty important for them to have somebody that could coach that position specifically and to coach it well. And given what Teron Johnson did in the last couple of years, clearly Salgado has something that makes sense and works for that position. Teron Johnson has really turned into one of the the best nickel corners in the game, not just because of his coverage abilities, but also because of his tenacious run defense. And part of that's always been in Teron Johnson's game, but playing it at that level at the NFL, I mean, that is just crazy. Going from Weber State to being one of the best nickel corners in the NFL and being somebody that can like just be a force in the run game is genuinely not something that Johnson did all by himself. I think Salgado has had a pretty strong role in Taron Johnson's development. And I am very excited to see what else he'll bring to the safety group. And it's good to have that sort of continuity from one position of defensive backs to the other position of defensive backs. Salgado, I believe, also has had, looking through his history, he's coached secondary for a very, 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 very long time in college. He was the defensive coordinator at Princeton for several years. So I'm very excited with Salgado being on this team. So it'll be very, very good to have him back and in this position. That takes care of all of the position coaches. Moving on to the assistants on defense. One of the most interesting assistants that they added was Marcus West. Before we get to him, Kyle, only Bill with more dog in him than Josh Allen's Taron Johnson. Honestly, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. He's definitely got that dog in him. That's for sure. I mean, you got what is he? 5'10", 185, like getting up there with the offensive line and just putting his head down and smashing running backs in the hole. He's phenomenal. He really is. Marcus West, assistant defensive line coach. This guy was the head coach, co-defensive coordinator, and defensive line coach for the UNC Charlotte 49ers for the past 3 seasons, and now has taken an assistant defensive line coach in the NFL for the Buffalo Bills. I'm kind of curious as to the why behind it. Part of me just sort of thinks that, wearing as many hats as he was for a Division I program at UNC Charlotte might have just been wearing on him a lot. Being the head coach, the co-defense coordinator, the defensive line coach, it's a lot. It's a lot to contend with. You have a lot of responsibilities, not just as a coach, but also recruiting in college. So I think there's part of me, again, I'm not the one with the inside information. I have no idea. Someone should ask him about it. Somebody with media credentials, which apparently is not me. Marcus West, somebody should ask him, what exactly his reasoning was for coming to Buffalo. I just think that, he wanted an opportunity to just sort of, focus more on coaching rather than and coaching defensive line rather than doing this and that and recruiting and this and defensive line. And it's just, it's probably good for him to just take a step back, and focus on something that he knows that he loves and really wants to coach. And I'm glad that he is on this team. This is a really interesting hire for them. Moving on to Kyle Shurmur as a defensive quality control coach. This is interesting because Kyle Shurmur was a quarterback coming out of college, played at Vanderbilt. Actually, fun fact, I believe he has the most touchdowns for a career for a quarterback at Vanderbilt, overtaking the infamous Jay Cutler, which is just funny to me. Kyle Shurmur, son of former 2-time NFL head coach Pat Shurmur. Kyle Shurmur, this is his first time full-time coaching job. He was a volunteer assistant at Vanderbilt. He was a practice squad quarterback for a couple different teams last year. He was even on the active roster for the Washington Commanders. Ended up not really playing and was waived by the Commanders on January 4th of 2022. And now he's going to be a defensive quality control coach for this team. So it'll be interesting to see what he brings for this team and how long he is for this team as well. Last assistant is going to be Jalen Finner, who's going to be another defensive quality control guy. He's kind of coached in a couple different places. He started off at Houston Episcopal High School, went to Texas A&M Commerce. He was a GA at Ball State and Rice, where he played safety. He's going to be interesting to see he's somebody that definitely has a lot of experience coming up through college. It'll be interesting to see what exactly he brings. He's another, former DB. Obviously, this team is very defensive back heavy. It has a big focus on its defensive backs, given that it plays 5 defensive backs a majority of the time. So that kind of thing is very important. I would imagine that he will be assisting a lot with guys like Salgado and Butler, just to give them another person and another, especially young guy in that room. So that'll be good for them. Last section that we are going to get to is special teams, and we're getting into this. I wanted to make sure I highlighted special teams, obviously, because Kyle would probably kill me if I didn't mention special teams and his favorite kicking deity, Matt Ariza, even though Matt Ariza doesn't really have anything to do with this. But whatever. Oh my God, my throat is really done. So we're going to try and wrap this up quickly. Matt Smiley has been the assistant coordinator for this special teams unit since McDermott was brought on in 2017. Originally, the special teams coordinator was Danny Crossman, who nobody likes because he's not very good. When I actually went to Miami Dolphins training camp practices last year, Danny Crossman, if you didn't know, was on the coaching staff for the Dolphins. He was their special teams coordinator. And I always knew when Danny Crossman was talking, because he would basically just yell everything that he said. He was the loudest coach on that team during those practices that I was at. You knew exactly if somebody was yelling, it was Danny Crossman yelling at some poor practice squad scrub trying to make this team. So, after Danny Crossman was fired, shout out Amy Wagner. Always good to see you. HGT and whoever's up there. Yeah. I do agree with you. That's good stuff. Sorry about that. So after Danny Crossman was hired, they ended up hiring Heath Farwell to be the special teams coordinator. He put together some pretty good special teams units here. Farwell also had the benefit of having this team and this front office really invest in special teams as well. With guys like Tyler Matakevich and having guys like Taron Johnson, and obviously Jordan Poyer plays special teams as well. Saron Neal has been a phenomenal special teams ace. AJ Klein was really good on special teams when he was here. They really put a lot into special teams, and they've continued to do so, drafting Tyler Bass, drafting Matt Ariza. I think Smiley definitely has plenty of experience. It'll be tough, I think, for him to be the full-time guy. There's a lot that you have to really work with. I mean, you got to figure out when it comes to special teams, you have to be the guy for everything, right? Like, you have to be the guy who knows how to set up the field goal blocking unit. Like, you have to be able to figure out who's going to be on defense for field goals. You're going to have to figure out how to play the coverages on kickoff and special teams and onside kicks and squib. How do you do all these things? How do you return? How do you return this way? How do you return that? How do you do punt returns? How do you do your fakes? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a lot of responsibilities, and I don't think everybody really fully grasps all that and how much goes into that. And you're also working with guys from offense and defense, which, and you're working with a lot of guys, and you might be working with certain guys that you like as a special teams coach, but that the team says, hey, they don't bring enough to offense or defense. Like, we only have so many spots on this roster. We got to cut some of these guys out. And I think that can be a lot of, there's like a constant adjustment when you're a special teams coordinator, which makes their other hire a little interesting. Their assistant coordinator is going to be Cody Harkey. Cody Harkey was not a special teams coach before he came to Buffalo. He was not even in the NFL as a coach. He was actually previously the tight ends coach, and we have the porn bots coming back into the chat. Thank you very much. Block you. Get out. Thank you. He was previously the tight ends coach at Azusa Pacific and at Tennessee State. He is also a former tight end with the Rams when Rob Boris was there as their tight ends coach. I wonder if that was sort of the connection that came from that. I don't know if maybe Matthew Smiley was recommended him from that. I don't know what the connection was there. But this is going to be Cody Harkey's first NFL job. It's his first special teams job, and he's going to be the assistant coordinator for this team in 2022. It'll be interesting to see. There's a lot of young, sort of not so overly experienced coaches as the assistants on the staff, which is fine. I think that that's perfectly fine. And I think it shows the type of confidence that McDermott has in himself, of course, but also in his other coaches. I think he's really set up the staff where, like, the guys that he feels like really confident in, like Frazier, Salgado, Washington, Butler, Babbage, those all have guys who have pretty young assistants that are not super experienced. Whereas when you look on offense, I mean, there's just former offensive coordinator, former offensive coordinator, former offensive coordinator, helping this new offensive coordinator come along. And I think that's interesting, and I think it's also pretty deliberate. I think it's a very smart, deliberate move on McDermott's part to be able to build a very well-rounded coaching staff that is not totally reliant on veterans and is not just full of a bunch of new and experienced guys. It's a good mix. It's how you keep ideas fresh. It's how you keep this team from just becoming stagnant from a coaching perspective. And I think that that's another aspect of Sean McDermott and his evolution as a coach, and always being very, very open-minded. One last thing that I want to say about McDermott to sort of close this thing out. A few years ago, Seth Wickersham, an ESPN columnist, wrote a very, very lengthy, detailed article about the failures of the Browns since Jimmy and Dee Haslam took over that team. Just the management issues they've had, the coaching mistakes that they've made in terms of hiring coaches. And he mentioned during the 2017 cycle that when the Browns decided to go in a more analytics-based approach for their front office, bringing in former Moneyball guru Paul DePodesta, the group that was in charge of the front office had interviewed quite a few people, including Sean McDermott, and that was the guy that the Browns front office recommended that the Browns hire to the ownership. And one of the reasons that they really liked McDermott was because he was very open-minded. He was very open to new ideas. He was he wasn't overly traditional and closed off. Or was it 2017? No, this was during the 2016 hire. My apologies. They end up hiring Hugh Jackson. And Hugh Jackson had his time in the NFL. And it is long gone, probably lost in some tax foundation scheme where he's going to be investigated by the IRS. We're not getting into that, though. Regardless of that, I always found that very interesting that Sean McDermott was somebody that they really liked from an analytics perspective. And obviously, McDermott has brought in analytics to Buffalo as well and has had that be a major part of the coaching staff and his decision-making and in personnel evaluation. I think that that's been a great part, and it's been great to see the evolution of McDermott. Folks, that is it. I promise that is it. I can't believe I actually did over an hour just going through this coaching staff. I want to thank you all for coming out, even though it is just me tonight. I appreciate Kyle for keeping things lively in the chat as well, despite the fact that he cannot talk. I am very grateful for all of you folks for coming out. We do this every Monday. Next week, we're going to be doing our training camp preview like we originally planned for this week. So next Monday being 4th of July. So happy early 4th of July to you people. Thank you. Thank you, Amy. I'm proud of me too. Thank you. So stay tuned for next week. We're going to be doing our training camp preview. We have it'll be less than a month next Monday before the Bills are in training camp. That is exciting, folks. Get excited. Training camp is around the corner, which means the preseason is right around the corner, which means the regular season is around the corner. Football is getting back, folks. I'm getting my second win. No, I'm not. My throw is not getting a second win. Anyway, we're going to close this out. Y'all can follow Cover One. We are on Twitter. We are on Facebook. We are on YouTube, obviously. We are on Twitch. We're on Twitter. We are all over the place on Twitter. We've added some new really great talent at Low Buffalo. Ryan Sullivan, as you guys know, is Sports Rock. Greg Vorse, Hansel. He's like all these guys. Give him a follow if you haven't already. Follow all of our other guys. Follow the content we've been putting out. Some of our new writers have been putting out some really great stuff. I mentioned Low Buffalo putting out a great piece on Ken Dorsey. Go ahead and read that. It's been great having new guys on. Follow me on Twitter at DFAUXY at DFoxy. That is going to be it. Thank you all for coming out. Bye-bye.